And now, please rise and welcome Utah native and Nashville recording artist Cole Hartley to the stage to perform the national anthem.
Whoa, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Whoa, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
Now, approaching the podium is the Executive Director of the National Governors Association, Bill McBride.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Governors Association Summer Meeting in beautiful Salt Lake City, Utah. It's wonderful to be here in Salt Lake City, to be joined by governors, first spouses, governor staff members, and NGA partners from all across the country, and guests from around the world. Governors have had several meetings today already. That's the real benefit of our winter and summer meetings. They bring together governors from both parties and numerous states and territories to work together on national challenges. There is one challenge that impacts all the others, and that is the focus of today's sessions: toxic polarization. The goal of each NGA chair's initiative is to raise awareness of a pressing problem and to work towards bipartisan solutions. Often these are policy solutions, solutions that center largely on state and federal legislation. The Disagree Better initiative is unique in that it invites Americans of all ages and occupations to play a role. You don't have to be elected to office to take part. Bringing the partisan divide takes all of us. But elected officials do have a special duty to take part and a unique ability to focus attention on this important issue. And governors have responded, hosting events, recording videos, and sharing the Disagree Better messages in speeches and on social media. Although the chair's initiative technically lasts 1 year, their impact continues. That will certainly be the case with Disagree Better. And as the bipartisan organization representing our nation's governors, finding common ground is central to the work of the National Governors Association. I want to thank Governor Cox and Governor Polis for their leadership in championing this movement, and I thank every governor here with us today for their bipartisan leadership and willingness to work together to solve the issues facing states and territories. Now let's welcome to the stage the chair of the National Governors Association, our host, Utah's Governor Spencer Cox.
Thank you, Bill, for that kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be with you. I want to thank my good friend Cole Hartley for that incredible rendition of the national anthem. Let's give him another round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming to our state, to the great state of Utah, to beautiful Salt Lake City. We brought some heat for you today, but we have a nice air-conditioned room here, and we hope you're enjoying your stay. We've got some incredible events planned over the next 2 days and an amazing agenda. I want to thank all of you who have traveled out here to support us. I want to thank Bill McBride and his amazing team, as well as my team, who have worked so diligently to put all of this together, including us throwing curveballs at you every single day. I know it's already out there in the press, but we found out on July 4th that we were actually going to get President Zelensky here, something we'd been working on for a long time, and they moved mountains to make this all happen in just a few days. So thank you so much for your dedication and the sleepless nights in putting all of this together. So I've truly come to value these meetings in most part because of the opportunity that we get to work together as governors across partisan lines, finding real solutions, trying to help our constituents and the people of this great country to be better people and to make this a better place. The friendships that we make here are invaluable. We text each other more than you might think. When there's a crisis, we're there for each other. I know Governor Moore cannot be here, and he's so sad that he cannot be here, but his regrets, I know almost every one of you texted him the morning that bridge fell down, and that means something to each of us. When we meet those challenges, we know we're not alone. We get to meet them together. I especially want to thank my friend and my colleague, the vice chair of the National Governors Association, Jared Polis. He has been an incredible partner as we put this initiative together, as we went throughout the country sharing the ideals behind Disagree Better. He's been better at disagreeing better than I have, and I'm so proud of him and the work that he's done. I'm excited about our program today, and I'm so excited to learn more about his initiative tomorrow. But for now, please join me in welcoming Governor Jared Polis to the stage.
Thank you, Spencer, to you and Abby for being such gracious hosts. The only reason I seem better at Disagree Better is because I didn't face a primary in my reelect and you did. So I know that makes things a little more difficult to walk the walk, and appreciate you doing that. I would add, profile and courage and bravery to really do that, which was necessary for our country. At a local political cost, and just know that we understand that and appreciate that all the more for your work. It really has been a great privilege to work alongside Governor Cox on this important effort to disagree better. It's needed now more than ever before. The reaction to this initiative has really been tremendous from all quarters. It's truly about finding common ground to solve the problems that we face. In our case as governors, that we were elected to solve. It's about leaning into, rather than away from, the difficult conversations, holding close our values and principles, but not being afraid to engage with others. In fact, our very democracy depends on people being able to disagree with one another, having the tools to do so in a constructive way, often passionately, but emphatically, but still being able to work together with dignity, mutual respect. We can do this, and we are doing this, and many governors have modeled this through thoughtful conversations, doing our best to prevent policy arguments from becoming personal attacks. This work isn't easy. If it was, it would have been done already. But I share Governor Cox's belief that we'll be so much more effective in solving big problems and indeed forging a bright future for our nation when we can truly learn to hear one another and to disagree better. And I'll be excited to hear from Governor Cox about the next stages of Disagree Better, which might be birthed here in this year through the work of NGA, but will continue to hopefully be a beacon of change across the country. Thank you, Governor Cox, to all the governors who participated in Disagree Better. Some of you are here with us today. Thank you for that great work, amplifying and embodying the message, whether formally through a commercial, informally, through practicing the politics of hope rather than the politics of personal destruction. Thank you again, Governor Cox, for your gracious leadership, for your initiative, which is needed for our country and for our future. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to do something a little different. We were going to watch a short video, but I'm going to skip that for now, and we'll do that at the end, just because our next guest has a hard out to catch a flight. One of the cool things about being the chair of the National Governors Association and putting together an event like this is you just get to dream a little and invite and talk to the people that you admire most. And that's certainly true of our next guest. I'm delighted to introduce President Ben Sasse, I like the name of that, the title of that, who is currently serving as the 13th president of the University of Florida. He previously served as a U.S. Senator from Nebraska from 2015 to 2023. Before that, he served as president of Midland University and as a senior official in the Bush administration at the Department of Health and Human Services. Perhaps most relevant for our discussion today, Ben is the author of an important book that shaped my thinking on a variety of topics. Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal is the title of the book. We're going to talk about that book today and how it relates to my Disagree Better initiative. We're also going to talk about the environment on college campuses and how we can teach students the right kind of conflict. I've been friends with President Sasse for many years. He's truly been a mentor to me and to so many in this country. Please welcome to the stage President Ben Sasse.
Before the governor talks, I just want to say, when he says you get to dream big and invite anybody you want, what he's telling you is like 6 people rejected him. So you're getting back up.
That is not true. What is true is he was my first call for lots of our events, and this is the first time we were able to actually get together, and I'm glad it finally worked out. Okay, so for those who have not read the book, and I hope everybody read it, by the way, I think I sold as many of your books as you did. I've talked about it often.
Read by dozens.
It's an incredible book. So you wrote this in 2018, and I think it was prescient. I actually look back longingly on 2018. But I just want to share a couple of the chapter titles with the audience so we can set the stage here. Chapter 1, Our Loneliness Epidemic. Chapter 2, Strangers at Work. 3, The Comforts of Polititainment. That's politics and entertainment combined, for those who are wondering. The Polarization Business Model. Become Americans Again. Set Tech Limits. Buy a Cemetery Plot. Be a Smarter Nomad. We need more tribes. So there's so much that we could talk about in this book. It's held up very well over the past 6 years. I want to ask you, looking back now, 6 years later, is there anything you would change about the book? How do you think things have come since then? Where are we in this space?
What's the old joke when somebody turns in their dissertation? They say, I wrote a 500-page dissertation because I didn't have time to write a 200-page dissertation. So when you look back at anything you wrote a while ago, you're like, where the heck was my editor? I think that the media consumption point in the book is the part that holds up strongest for me, which is, this is not to sort of push it off on, all that's wrong in technology of our moment, but I think we do have to recognize that 100 years from now, when you look back on our moment, I don't think we're going to talk much about politics at all. You're going to talk about the fact that we were living through a technological revolution that created an economic revolution where the richest people any time and place in human history, the median American household, the median folks that you all get the privilege of representing, are the richest people in all of human history. But those economics are disrupting place, right? This supercomputer, most of us are dumb enough to walk around with 2 or 3 of these things. It has more computing capacity than ballroom-size gymnasium computer mainframes at MIT in the late 60s and early 1970s that won the Cold War. It's an amazing tool, but it takes your consciousness beyond the time and place where you're breaking bread around the table with someone. And our business model for how we consume information now is narrow but deep. There is no large shared conversation that's being had anywhere in America. And I think we have to recognize how that drives us toward tribalism, because just think about the protests on campus the last few months. There are things about them that are completely different than the protests of the 1960s, where you were really trying to persuade other people. Most of these protests right now aren't trying to persuade other people. They're trying to signal to the closest kin around you that you're purer and deeper in your commitment to the cause. And that's really different than a big, broad American idea where persuasion is more important than violence.
I hear some echoes of Jonathan Haidt and some of his work.
I just crib him whenever I can.
Me too. Great stuff. But again, you were a first mover in this spot. You did talk about the politainment. You talked about cable news and the dangers of cable news and social media. Seems like that's getting worse, not better. And can you think about the next kind of evolution of this with AI, and where's your brain in that space today?
So let's do I won't call it a pessimistic, but let's do like a realistic take on it, and then let's talk about what hopes of, what can we be optimistic about? I mean, first of all, maybe it's just worth having a level set on a few of the facts about how little shared conversation happens, right? Are we on C-SPAN or not? If we're not, I'll be blunter. Are we on TV?
We're on TV. I think we're on TV.
We are? Okay, never mind. Then let me go.
Still be
Let
kind of
me go a little more boring. I mean, when you think about the way we consume cable news and the stuff that you all have to react to in your callings all day, every day, there is really no audience watching it, right? Like there really isn't. I mean, in the last 2 or 3 years, the most watched political cable programming in America is Tucker Carlson, and he's been fired for a year and a half. And if you go back and you look, how many times did he break north of 1% of the public? It's single digits. Right, there are 330 million Americans. When you get 3.3 million viewers, that'd be 1% of the public. And the cable news shows that we react to all the time, they never get 1% of the public. Right? And so we pretend that these are big conversations that are happening in America. They're not. The big conversations in America are about football. The 100 most watched programs in 2023 in America, 96 of them were football games. These are real facts, real stats. 89 NFL games, 7 college football games, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which is the intro show for Dallas Cowboys football, and the Super Bowl outro show. 98 of 100 most watched programs in America last year were about football. There was the State of the Union and the Academy Awards, the only 2 non-football programs that break in. If you compare that to like what our parents grew up with, and this is not golden age romanticism, it's just when you only had 3 or 4 media outlets, there were a lot more people in the same conversation. In the late 1950s, I Love Lucy had a 68% weekly share and a 91% monthly share. I Love Lucy wasn't important content, but it was shared content. You could admit that there was a lot of stuff you were dialoguing about with neighbors down the street when you wanted to duck a politicized topic that was awkward to talk about at the dinner table. My oldest kid is 23, born in the summer of 2001. In her entire life, except for one-off events like the Super Bowl, in her entire life, the most watched programming in America is Sunday Night Football, hit a 12% share for 3 weeks in September of 2014. 1 out of 8 households watch the same thing 3 times in her entire life. That's a quarter of a century. And so I think we just have to be cognizant of the fact that the business model is to go narrow and deep and give lots of voice to the angriest people. Most Americans aren't that angry.
That's the hopeful piece. I like that.
So the hopeful piece is, how do we get smarter at consuming information that's not propaganda? Right? Like, there's a whole bunch of people who want to scream, there's some idiot at the other end of the political spectrum who just did something and showed they're a real jackass. No kidding. Through all of human history, there's some idiot doing something stupid. Why should we give them all the attention? Most people want to make sure in their neighborhood people aren't driving too fast and running over their kids because they want to go to Little League.
I love that. Amen. Look, you've now been a university president for a few years. And you already talked about the protests on campus. We had a convening in Colorado about universities before October 7th and everything that's happened there. We talked about the Chicago principles a bit. You've been very outspoken, I believe in a positive way, about what we should be doing on campuses. I'm interested in your work at the Hamilton Center as well. Could you just share what it's like to be? I told a university president in Utah the other day. The only thing worse than being in politics right now is being a university president. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that take.
I mean, obviously, campuses are roiled at the present time, but the University of Florida is an extraordinary place. It's very rare that you get to be flagship and land-grant in the same institution. You don't usually get to be UVA and VodTech, Texas and Texas A&M, but we're both. So we're the land-grant institution that's in all 67 counties, but our mothership, the main campus in Gainesville, has 86,000 souls, and we have Ivy League level admissions. If the state of Florida were a standalone nation, it's the 14th largest GDP on earth, and it's the fastest growing of those 14 nations, and there's just massive demand to move to Florida right now. So the University of Florida has done some amazing things, and the board leadership over the course of the last 10 or 12 years have taken it to really extraordinary place, and our students are incredibly special folks. The reality is, though, the model of college that we all still have in our head, you're never there until you're 18, and then you go and you're full-time for 4 years, and then 4.5 years in, you drop from 100% time on campus to 0, and you go out into the world and you work until death or retirement. That's not the future. The future is median Americans who are 35, 40, 45, and 50 are going to have to get retrained for new jobs, and that's because of the awesome stuff that's happening in the AI revolution. Mark Andreessen's piece 10 years ago in the Wall Street Journal, Software Eats the World, is still worth reading on every breakfast table as if it were currently written today. There's never been a world where humans really needed to be lifelong learners, and the world we're entering right now is one where jobs are going to get eaten up. We are somewhere between 10 and 30 years away from all having a robot that builds robots for us. And when that happens, it means your work evaporates at middle age, and you have a new adolescent-like experience, which is trying to figure out who am I going to be, which kind of means what am I going to do? How do I live a life of gratitude that serves my neighbors and puts bread on the table? And you have to rethink stuff at 40 and 45. And so higher ed is going to have to get a lot better at coming up with a come-and-go model. We want preparation for work and preparation for life. But if you get gritty and if you develop the right habits to be prepared for life, that's going to include having to get prepared for work again and again and again as the AI revolution eats whatever work you used to do, because we're going to be able to reduce any set of tasks that are reducible to repetitive steps. We're going to reduce them to marginal cost 0 eventually. And that's really great for consumers and scary as heck for us as workers.
The disruption that comes from a world where that happens. I mean, we saw that kind of disruption with an industrial revolution, but this is that on steroids, right?
Strongly
and so
agree.
How do we as policymakers start to prepare for those inevitable changes that are coming?
Yeah,
Any
great.
thoughts?
I think your analog to the Industrial Revolution is right. Like, history nerd for a minute. There are only 4 kinds of economies in human history, right? There were hunter-gatherers. There was settled agrarians from the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago until 150 years ago. Obviously, we still have unbelievably productive ag in this country, but at the scale of how many workers are needed, well under 2% of the populace. So you had hunter-gatherers, you had agrarianism, you had industrialism, and you had, what's this economy? The knowledge economy, the IT economy. A lot of sociologists just call it the post-industrial economy, which is another way of saying we don't really know what to call it, so let's call it the after the last thing. In the hunter-gatherer and in the agrarian economy, you didn't have job choice. You just had going from 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 years old and getting better at doing what mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and everybody else in your community had always done, and you would do that kind of work. The Industrial Revolution created economic specialization and job choice, and it was scary as heck from 1870 to 1890. By 1900, 1910, 1920, we realized we were going to be able to navigate it. But in the late 19th century, it was really scary as people were pushed from farms and pulled to cities and went to try to figure out how to do new work. And the idea of adolescence that we have, which is different than puberty, right? Puberty is your body going from being a kid to an adult. Adolescence is the identity crisis that is about figuring out what does that mean, and it's not really about puberty. It's partly about hormones, but it's largely about what am I going to do? Because I got to figure out how to specialize. But it was a one-time thing. You had to figure out what you're going to do, and you did it until death or retirement. What we have now is we're going to have that kind of work identity crisis happen many, many, many times in the course of your life. And you all know this well, the opioids epidemic. we had pre-COVID, from 2016 to 2019, we had declining life expectancy in the US 3 out of 4 years at a time when maternal and child mortality was down, octogenarian life expectancy was up, cancer deaths were down, heart disease was down. The two biggest killers in the country at 23 and 26%. Cancer and heart disease were both down, octogenarians were living longer, people were dying less as kids, and yet life expectancy was going down. Why? Because we had massively declining 20 to 50-year-old male deaths. Suicide proper, opioids, liver disease. If you're 70, liver disease is a disease. If you're 30, liver disease is usually a kind of suicide. What is that about? That's about the crisis of identity around work. Do I matter? Does anybody need me? And I think at a policy level, we have to really rethink our whole way we think and talk about education to say, we're training people for work, but we're also having to develop and inculcate the kinds of habits that allow you to know you're gritty enough to deal with the job disruption at 35 and 50, and nobody's ever had to do that on a mass level before.
Okay. My staff had a bet, I'm sure, how long it would take me to mention Alexis de Tocqueville, so we're gonna do it now. 1830s, Alexis de Tocqueville shows up here and sees an interesting place with lots of associations, right? People wanted to accomplish something, they needed a hospital, they formed an association to build a hospital. Schools, same thing. So this society of associations continues into the 1900s. We have, I know a topic you like to talk about, these volunteer type associations, right? They really matter, you know, Lions clubs and Rotary clubs, those types of things. And now we live in an era, well documented by you and others, of a destruction of institutions. Religious institutions being one of the main ones that de Tocqueville saw when he came here. And so we're losing those. I always ask people to raise their hands. How many of you, and I'll ask this now, how many of you are Rotarians in the room? Yeah, good job, both of you. That's awesome. Yeah.
I really thought he was just going to lie for the cameras. When I looked out, I had horror on my face because there were no hands.
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, great. 2.
40 years ago, half the room,
yeah.
a whole room would have been Rotarians. So, and you talk a lot about the loneliness epidemic. That's where you start your book, and I agree. I think that's at the heart of our polarization and tribalism, and you talk about finding more tribes, different identities. Where are you now on the topic of how can we build these institutions? What does that look like when nobody's going to church anymore and we don't have any shared television? What is it how do we bring people together?
Boy, there's a lot of meat in that. So let's stay.
It's really your whole book.
Let's stay at Tocqueville for a minute, and then let's talk about what can we build in a future that's going to be hybrid, right? The future is not going to be like it was, but it also can't be exclusively digital, remote, anonymous, lonely, right? So it's going to have to be hybrid. But let's stay at your Tocqueville stuff for a minute. So, you know, America in Philadelphia, 1787, is one of the most glorious, interesting moments in human history, to have a big debate about what it looks like to say, we want self-control, self-discipline, self-governance, so you don't have to have other governance, other control, and somebody else disciplining you. It's an amazing thing, but it's a bunch of weirdos on the edge of the earth, right? Like Europe looks over at us, and they're not paying attention to Philadelphia. They don't think this moment is that interesting. And in a way, it's worth thinking about, you know, the War of 1812 is like extended time play in soccer. The Brits were distracted, and their King George had kind of gone nuts. And so War of 1812 is when they're going to come put the colonists back in their place. And once we win the War of 1812, by 1814, Europe looks over, and they're like, huh, looks like that's a new country. It's actually a thing, and they're going to last for a while. And so Tocqueville, in the 1830s, decides to come and be a travel reporter, right? He decides to explain to Europeans what America is. And I think Democracy in America is one of the most fascinating books ever, and yet the history professor in my soul knows it's a terrible thing to just assign to kids straight up, start reading this 1,500-page tome, because it's so long-winded and it's so repetitive, and that's because it's not meant to be a book. So like if you own it, rip the spine off it, just randomly separate it in 5 to 10 page chunks and just put paper clips in it, and then spread it all over your house like it's a bunch of, you know, Sports Illustrated articles, because that's what he actually wrote, right? He wrote a whole bunch of dispatches. So he goes to the US and he's going to write back to the French, but he has a broad European audience, and he's going to explain what America is. And here's the problem he thinks he's solving. Okay, a bunch of religious zealots go to the edge of the world and they build all these different communities, and that's fine and interesting, and you can be passionate about freedom of religion. I'm a First Amendment zealot, so free speech, press, religion, assembly, protest, they're all glorious. But a whole bunch of people in Europe weren't interested in that. They wondered, why the heck is America economically dynamic? In the 1830s and 40s, you have like the railroad revolution, the steam revolution. There's a whole bunch of invention happening in America, and Europeans are like, what's going on with that? And so Tocqueville says, I'm gonna go figure it out. I'm gonna go to the center of America, which will of course be Washington, D.C., and I'll figure out why America's dynamic. And he gets to D.C. and he says, holy crap, this place is like a swamp. Nobody works here in the summer. The people who are here don't seem that smart. I don't really see why there'd be any economic dynamism coming out of the United States because of DC. And he realizes Washington, DC is not the center of America. So he decides, I'll travel to the state capitals instead. And so at this time, there are 25 states, 25, 26. He travels, I think, to 18 state capitals, and he wants to find the meaning of America, and he comes to the state houses. And he realizes, he discovers the meaning of America in the Rotary Club. It wasn't called that then, but he said, America has this weird middle idea. We Europeans think you either have community, which must be enforced by the state, or you have a bunch of weirdos living off in a cabin by themselves in Montana as isolated individualists writing some weird treatise, right? You've got isolated individualism, or you've got state-enforced community. And he's like, no, these Americans, they believe in this other thing, which is community, but voluntary. You persuade people to marry you. The marriage isn't arranged. You persuade people to join your church or religious or synagogue. You don't get a charter from the state to collect taxes. You persuade people to buy your product. You don't get a charter from the government that says, I'm the only one who gets to operate on this trade line. And he said, Americans have this unbelievable idea that you have to actually compete and persuade, and you do it with love and argument and innovation. You don't do it with compulsion and power and shout down. And so America becomes unbelievably dynamic, and I still think one of the most interesting ways to understand America is through Tocqueville's eyes and saying, if you believe in souls, and you believe that souls can't be compelled, therefore a whole bunch of things about community and persuasion and voluntarism flow from that, and that's America. Here's the problem. That worked in the New England town village, and it ended up working in a whole bunch of urban ethnic neighborhoods. How does it work in a place where you're mostly living off in communities somewhere on this? And we haven't figured out the answer to that problem, and that's the challenge before us. The future is going to be hybrid, and we have to build new Tocquevillian institutions for a world where you partly are in community with people bodily. It matters to hug. It matters to break bread together. It matters to have your feet touch the ground and actually play in sports. But there's a lot about the digital revolution that's pretty dang extraordinary, that you can also convene communities that are asynchronous or sometimes synchronous but non-co-local. And right now we don't have the founding wave of new Tocquevillian institutions for a hybrid era, and we're always going to live in a hybrid era.
Okay, thank you. We have time for a couple questions. I'm happy to open it up. Governor Polis, please.
So I want to, it's
Congratulations
great to see
on
this.
your
What's
election.
that?
Congratulations on your election, by the way.
Thank you.
Both of them.
Excited to have this kind of discourse. We don't often find time for this intellectual stuff as governor, so it's kind of refreshing. I want to give kind of the progressive alternative and have you react to it. So, and I mean progressive in two ways. One is certainly on the political spectrum. The other is kind of as a, I'm somebody who's, internet progressive, love technology, you name it, X, Reddit, I'm there, 4chan, whatever, grew up with it, love it, BBSs, all that stuff. So, you talk about kind of the commonality of experience and in a way where, we've lost something we had. But I just want to flip the other side of where we are today relative to where we were and hopefully, see if you acknowledge the better place. I mean, sure, in the 50s or whatever, yes, people experienced the same news, the same things, but it also meant that, if you were a woman, you were expected to be the homemaker and a housewife, right? If you were gay, you were expected not to ever tell anybody. If you were a minority ethnicity or religion, you kept to yourself and weren't able to say that, and it was hard to find people like you in any way, shape, or form. So yes, today there are many ways that people can fulfill their full individuality, is how I'd put it. I mean, it really has enhanced our ability to be ourselves, be true to ourselves. Spencer talks about kind of the challenge to disagree better. How does your MAGA uncle and your woke niece, discuss together? I think that's the key challenge, right? It's not that, and I think it's great that conservative Christians and LDS and yes, MAGA groups, that people that demonstrated peacefully on January 6th were able to do that. That's wonderful. That's not my scene. I'm not going to do that, but that's wonderful. That's part of the great tapestry of American diversity, just as the Muslim community is, the LGBT community is, all of it. But the key part I think that's missing, I think from the progressive perspective, and I want you to react to that too, is in the tech terms, going back to, is the API, how you interface across that, right? How does the MAGA uncle and the woke niece interface in a way that's constructive and meaningful and positive, while also celebrating the fact that it's wonderful that people have found fellowship in their own individual way that's meaningful to them for their lives. That would have been very hard in the America of 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or that Alexis de Tocqueville observed, right? Absent from that, professional, educated, empowered women, the LGBT population, non-Christians, right? So how do you reconcile kind of that progressive side, or what I think anybody would acknowledge is the better part of this, with how you can form a more meaningful API or interface between people who might be more enriched and be able to live their true selves in a way that they simply couldn't have in America's past?
Yeah, so I think a lot of great and important stuff in there, but I want to stake my position as being pretty moderate on this, first of all. So your response, starting with the 1950s, I never said a word about the 1950s. I agree, I guess I did. You're wrong. I'm wrong. I did the I Love Lucy stat. So I think it's, when you think about what the digital revolution is going to bring us, there's a ton of awesome, right? There are unbelievable things in cultural commerce that echo things that are easier to see or talk about in economic commerce. I think Uber is pretty awesome, right? Like, I'm a former Uber driver, so I will say in full disclosure, I did a lot more work tours than town halls in my 8.5 years in the Senate. But I think ride sharing to find out information of people who are needing or wanting the same thing economically, or people who want to engage around certain things culturally, I think the process of discovery on the internet is amazing. I think the economic output potential on net is hockey stick. But I don't think people are fully actualized if they're only living in a digital, virtual, remote, asynchronous thing. I think we all know that the kinds of information, the anger and vitriol that you experience online doesn't represent what real people say to you, right? You might go by somebody on the freeway who acts like a complete jackwagon when they don't know that you're both gonna stop at the same Arby's in 10 minutes and stand in line next to each other. It's way less likely that somebody just gives you the finger, second and third in line at Arby's, as they might on the freeway. And the internet is the opportunity to live on the freeway all the time and reduce people to caricatured, not wholly ensouled, thick humans. I think George Packer's stuff, it's probably been almost 2 years ago now in the New Yorker, about America's 4-part culture war, is just a really useful hermeneutic to think about this moment. If ones are woke and fours are super MAGA, so twos are center left, threes are center right. America is demographically a three nation. It's a little bit center right. Our institutions are mostly two, led by twos. Ones and fours are a lot smaller group than twos and threes, right? Fours are moderately large group. Ones are tiny, the number of actually woke people, depending on how you want to parse the data. They're both really small, but twos and threes, to your disagree better logic, should both be classical liberals who believe that every upcoming election isn't the end of days. If my side loses, it's Armageddon and America's dead, right? Threes and fours agree on a lot of conservative policy. Ones and twos agree on a lot of progressive policy. But twos and threes really believe in America as communities of persuasion where politics and the state aren't the center of everything. The problem is the internet has reduced us to a place, or social media more properly, have reduced us to a place where threes don't get to talk to or about twos. They have to react against a one. There's some idiot doing something crazy. And twos don't get to partner with threes to maintain our institutions. They have to react to some number four. And therefore, twos often allow ones to have all the voice of the institutions they control. And threes have decided to cede the world to fours because it looks like fours have a little bit of energy. And people like me who are three, we're demographically the middle of America, but we don't have a lot of institutions. And so, Governor, I guess what I would say, and I'll pull up and give it back to you, Governor, but what I would say is you said fully actualized. And I think there's a process of discovery of communities, but full actualization happens when people are around a table breaking bread together and having conversation that doesn't reduce people to some caricatured part of, we disagree on some policy issue. That's not anywhere in the top 10 of the issues I care about in life, is that somebody might vote different than me on one policy issue. I care about people in the same community wanting to raise their kids for a better future.
I know we're at time. I know you have a plane to catch. So I just want to give you the last word. You've got governors here. You've got a lot of very influential people here. You've talked about hope for the future. If you could give a piece of advice to all of us that comes from your book or from the last couple of years, what should we be doing to help the twos and threes have those conversations?
Great. I hadn't thought of giving you all advice. You have important callings, and thanks and kudos for all the important work you do. I think that the education reform that's needed in the next decade is probably the most pressing set of issues facing the nation. We have inherited, I obviously care a lot about the higher ed space, but in the K-12 space, we have inherited a kind of factory model schooling that fit industrialization. It doesn't fit the post-industrial age. We need to figure out how we unbundle a lot of what happens for 5 to 18-year-olds, but definitely for 10 to 18-year-olds. The idea that you go to one institution 40 hours a week and you're mostly inside, you're mostly sitting still, you're mostly on receive mode, it doesn't fit human anthropology. At the end of the day, kids aren't cogs, they're plants, and they have to grow toward the sun. And Socrates was right. If they don't have a question, you don't have a fertile enough soil that they're going to learn enough. And we have to be raising our kids to be a hell of a lot grittier than what we're turning out right now to be able to navigate what they're going to face, not just when they're 35 and 45, but when they're 20 and 25. And we need to figure out how we unbundle in a way that isn't just reducible to partisan tribalism. The factory model school itself is going to be rendered obsolete, and that shouldn't be a right-left question. It should be about how we create a lot more dynamism and innovation in the way we do education that enlivens and awakens kids so that they're actually curious at the end of every day.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to Governor Polis's initiative tomorrow, but I'll leave it there. It's also a good plug for your previous book, The Vanishing American Adult, which I also would encourage all of you to read. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a reason I'm excited to call him President Ben Sasse. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Good luck. Thanks a lot. Maybe you can smile. Thanks.